Well, welcome back to the Locker Room podcast, presented to you by Daily Sports Science. It's been a long time since I've been on here as a host, and so I'm looking forward to today. And I just want to welcome a massive special guest that's managed to grab him on air today. So I'm going to delightfully introduce Luke Woodhouse. Luke, pleasure to have you on, mate.
Thanks very much, Ross. Very smooth intro, mate. Very impressed.
So Luke will come on to a bit of an intro in a minute, but essentially he's a very well-known S&C coach with lots of experience, worked in very many organizations of high performance sport. So we're going to talk a lot of physical development and talk through your pathway today. And Luke, I don't know if Luke will know this, but I think it's about 2009. I haven't mentioned it to him yet. I actually applied for a pathway role at Middlesex when you used to post CVs off. So I actually posted an application to you, and that's how I remember your name, by writing Luke Woodhouse on this A3 bit of paper. Now, it never got you, or you just put it straight in the rejection pile, but that was my first introduction to you many years ago.
Oh, mate, I'm so sorry.
And now
I
we're
don't
really...
think it did go in the rejection pile, but yeah, mate. If my memory extended that far back, then I'd love to be able to say I remember, but I don't remember much from those days, actually, to be honest.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, Luke, mate, I'll give you a little brief intro, and then I'll let you fill in the details. So Luke's obviously worked in like many sports, high level cricket, high level rugby. He's temporarily coming in now with us to fill a little bit gap around some consultancy work here at QPR, which I'm delighted to have him in. And he's added loads of wealth of experience and knowledge to our players and staff here. So I'm going to hand over to you, mate, to just address the listeners, I guess, your career and what experience you bring.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. Appreciate the kind introduction. Inaccurate as it may be, as I've bumbled my way through my time here at QPR. Yeah, thanks, mate. I guess, undergrad sports science back in I don't even know when, and then background initially in personal training, so spent a bit of time in the private industry, in the private sector, personal training, which was cool. But passion always lay in sport, having been a rubbish rugby player and football player and everything else that goes with it. So yeah, passionate about training science. Started off working university rugby, and then moved into professional cricket. Had a decent stint there, and then moved back into professional rugby. In the interim, I worked at the Institute of Sport. So I was working with Olympic sports, badminton, and then technical leadership with some of the London region within the EIS, and then sort of touching a few other sports at the same time. And then, Premiership rugby, two clubs, Leicester Tigers, Wasps. Wasps went down the pan when I was there and went into administration, which was tough, but interesting experience. And then after that, I moved into, I left professional rugby and I moved to the Middle East. So I worked in Saudi Arabia. I've just come back from the 2-year stint over there, where mainly Olympic sport and high performance programs, but one of the primary roles was around workforce development and facility development, and essentially building high performance sport in Saudi Arabia. So that's again another really sort of interesting and very different experience, as you can imagine. So yeah, I've just returned from there, and yeah, in the interim at the moment, I'm working for World Rugby and doing some work with you guys as well. So yeah, all sorts of stuff. Certainly over the last 5 years since COVID, probably like everyone, it's been like a complete and utter roller coaster, and a load of years that you almost forget actually happened. That's a little bit like what it's been like for me. I'm like, did that actually happen just 3 or 4 years ago? So yeah, it's been busy, but cool as well. Yeah, I've learned a lot.
Nice, mate. Yeah, really interesting journey. And you summarised that actually in a very short space of time for the amount of years you've put in. Talk to me about your time when you went into administration at WASP. Obviously, a very hard time and the transition out of that. I think it'd be nice for the listeners to see, because it's quite a common thing that can happen, redundancy, administration. Like, how did you deal with that? And what was your initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've been there for, I guess, 3 seasons, approaching 3 seasons, and there'd already been a rugby club gone bust in the league, which was Worcester Warriors, and so there was this sort of dark cloud around, is rugby struggling a little bit here? So I think there was a little bit of trepidation in the air generally, but I don't think anyone really ever expected a club like Wasps, which is a massive institution, to disappear. So it was very, very strange at the time, very, very tough and cutthroat, because you essentially have the whole club come into a room, all the employees, and then are told at that point, from this point onwards, 9 o'clock this morning, you are redundant. Grab your papers on the way out so that you can put in your claims for loss of earnings or whatever else. But that's it. So there was a moment where all that's done, and sort of there's lots of tears. Lots of players have been at the club their whole careers. So, you can imagine the connection that a lot of players would have had with that club and with the players that they're with and with the other staff members. So, for me, I've been there for a short period of time, so it wasn't as impactful. But I think for some of the guys, absolutely brutal. But there was a poignant moment at the end where all the sort of the formalities were done, and everybody just sort of stood up and went around the room shaking hands with one another, which was very, very. And then out the door, out the gate, never to return. And you know what it's like working in pro sport. How tight things are, really, really consistently, and it's literally just like shattered on one day. So it's pretty impactful, more so, like I say, for the others in the room than for me. So it was very tough. But one thing that I really learnt from that moment was actually the power of the network in strength and conditioning and within sports science. Absolutely massive. Like, so many people, and it was not just me, it was the same for all the staff, I think, there, that so many people from different clubs, rival clubs, different organizations, would also, people you didn't really know, but you'd maybe had some interaction with over the years, would phone you up, drop you a message: mate, anything I can do, can I support you in any way? If there's anything that comes up, I'll give you a shout, or I'll let you know. So just like huge amount of support, I think, from the network, which kind of gives you a real confidence around, actually, there's a lot of good people in our industry,
Yeah.
who are really, really supportive and will bend over to help people and really support you, and to see when things are difficult. So, I think that was really, really good. And it actually helped me because, I was probably unemployed for about 1 month after I finished at Wasps. And I had some like pretty good opportunities again, just on the basis that, I'm older, I was probably, 39, 40 at the time, or what have you. No, maybe a bit younger, 38. Doing myself a disservice there. I was a bit younger, but because I've been around a fairly decent period of time, I probably had a fairly well-established network of people, and even if it wasn't people that I knew directly, people who knew people that knew me, it meant that I was able to probably, tap into some things that I probably wouldn't have been able to otherwise. So I think like the power of networking over a long period of time, and
Yeah.
just, trying to be supportive to other people, and, engaging with people, really like made a massive difference to me when I was redundant, because, I was unemployed for a month. I got a couple of opportunities in the interim, and then I got another opportunity, another professional rugby club, just through network and just through people who knew people. And then opportunity came up, and I was able to jump on it because, I had those connections. So, the one lesson was like really, really important to engage in the network, get to know people, make a positive impression on other people, and also support other people as well, where you can help people and other people. And please do that, because it always comes back to help you at some point. So, and I think, honestly, a lot of people found that at Wasps with a rugby club, and the other rugby clubs which have gone bust since. London Irish have gone bust as well, Worcester Warriors prior to that. A few others have been on the edge, I think, as well. But that there are, I think a lot of those people also had the same experience that I did, really positive. So yeah, I think there were good things and bad things that came out of that experience, for sure.
Of course. No, really good advice. I think people say around like how essential it is to network and keep yourself around the community and help others. But actually, when you end up in that situation, it just shows you how important that really is.
Yeah.
And you've come out the other side. Luke, talk to me about your time at Middlesex. You was there for extensive period. I assume from the outside, you built a program from probably very little to a program that when you left it looked a lot different to when you joined it. Talk to me about your journey there and kind of how you evolved that provision within elite cricket to what you left.
Yeah, it was cricket was great. Like, when I started cricket, I had no interest in cricket, to be honest, Ross. I was like, rugby was my sport, and I played other sports at the same time, football, boxing, combats, and that sort of thing when I was a kid. And so cricket was something that, I was from a pretty normal school. So cricket was like a posh sport. So I didn't really play much of it when I was a kid either. But yeah, I jumped into it, and it was so, obviously, like you say there, it was so not what I expected. It felt very backward to me because I'd come from a rugby and football background, and it was just very, very different. Can you hear me, Ross? Yeah.
Yeah, you just broke up a little bit there, mate. Just go back to you just jumped into cricket.
Yeah, sorry, mate.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, so essentially the role at the time, it was just, I guess this is the first time that strength and conditioning and sports science had been formally introduced to cricket. It was almost up to most cricket clubs to, if you wanted a fitness coach, you could get one to come in, and it was more of a contractual arrangement with most cricket clubs. But the ECB at the time invested a load of money. Simon Timpson was the driving force, who was actually exceptional at the time, I think, in terms of creating infrastructure and some really good anchors for all the counties to really sort of, I guess, to anchor to, as it were. So he put in place minimal operating standards and expectations for all the clubs. So really the pathway for most strength and conditioning coaches was to get into the clubs and to understand the landscape, and then try to start to put in place some structure according to the minimal operating standards, which is not as easy as it sounds, because some clubs were really loose, others were pretty good, some didn't have any facilities. The club I was at, Middlesex particularly, was it didn't really have any facilities. It was it had an indoor school and a shared gym up in East End Road in Finchley, and then it had the Lord's cricket ground gym, which is rubbish, and it was sort of designed as a personal training gym, for people like Paul McCartney to come over the road and train in, but it wasn't really necessarily fit for purpose. So yeah, a lot of it, I guess, started off with just creating some basic structure for cricketers to understand how can we actually start to move the needle from a physical perspective, and but also, I guess, with respect to what the sport demands, because again, cricket is a skill by a sport, so it physical capability is a bit ambiguous in cricket. It's, you go one step further and you look at sports which are highly skill biased. There's no physical development going on there. There are still elite cricketers who can get by being physically fairly poor, but because their skill sets are so advanced, it makes things challenging in terms of establishing those norms for them. So I guess a lot of it came down to trying to establish links between physical capabilities and some of the key requirements of cricket, which, again, I think over time, everyone talks about reverse engineering, maybe the buzzword at the moment, but probably starting with the basics and looking at the critical skill sets within cricket. What is it that they need to be able to do? Well, they need to be able to sprint, and they need to be able to decelerate, and they need to be able to throw, and they need to be able to hit, and they need to be able to bowl. And there's some fundamental basic capabilities that I think we just started with, essentially looking at, okay, well, what is going to contribute towards your sprint performance and your deceleration performance? Because for you batters, that's the only thing potentially that we can really influence, your ability to accelerate, decelerate, and then repeat that. And then hopefully over time, you become less fatigued from that particular task, which means that your cognitive capabilities are preserved for long periods of time, which means you can bat longer and you can get more scores, which means you can earn more money, you can drive a better car, you can do all the things that maybe matter to you a little bit. So I think just trying to create those links back from the fundamental physical capabilities of the task, and then build it up to something that actually looks like what they do, and a link to their understanding of what they really, really do. So I think that was, in terms of selling to the players and getting the players to buy in and understand, I think that was really important. But for me, I didn't know anything much about cricket as well. I played a little bit at school, so like the idea of like listening and respecting the expertise of the players, that was something that I learned really early on in cricket, and that was, I think, formed a really key fundamental of understanding the game. And then from the game, I was then able to build, some of the physical requirements and capabilities, and that probably underpinned or then building the behavioural capabilities that underpin those physical capabilities. So, you know, the behaviours of cricketers in terms of their adherence to work wasn't there. They would enjoy going for runs during the off season, for, you know, doing half marathon stuff to stay generally fit, which was fine. But if you're going to move some of those performance characteristics on a little bit more, then we needed to generate a little bit of a clearer link with them, so they started doing things that actually represented performance change a little bit more. So I think that was something that sat on top of that overall structure, just trying to create buy-in from the players and understand the game a little bit more. So there was a fairly robust deterministic model around, you know, what are the tactical and technical requirements of cricket? How do we underpin that physically? And then what are the behavioural characteristics we need to see in the environment on a regular basis to be able to then drive that whole model? So so that was that was really important. And then all of the little components that sat around that were then gradually put in place. So, you know, things like assessments and screening. Well, what is it we're screening? Are we screening things that are relevant to these things that we're already talking about from a physical perspective, which we know link to some of the technical and tactical components? And then similarly within the behaviours of the environment, well, if we're going to make those changes from a physical perspective, which we know will then contribute towards technical and tactical performance, then we have to display some of these behavioural characteristics on a consistent basis, which means preparation, arriving on time, doing all the basic professional things that we need to see from players to actually make a change. So I think there was some basics that fell in place on that front, and then a lot of the stuff was that then sat around that as well was around facility development. So again, no facilities, so trying to ensure that there was facilities that were fit for purpose meant building facilities. They built a facility up at Radlett, which, you know, I had to personally fit a gym in at the time, which, you know, I was the cricket clubs didn't have a huge amount of money at the time, so I was purchasing old Olympic lifting platforms from the EIS, or, you know, doing whatever, fitting a rubber floor myself, just to ensure that the facilities were available to then be able to deliver some of those components. So I think those two things were important. First of all, establishing what was needed, getting that anchor to their actual performance, stripping back the physical requirements to what really matters, and then understanding, as you say, behavioural characteristics that then underpin that, but then also ensuring that there's a facility, or there are facilities in place which allow players to easily put that into practice. So those are some of the key components. And then I think that the whole academy system and the development of the academy was another component which involved I guess long-term athlete development. So establishing a long-term athlete development model, again, thinking about the technical and tactical components of the game, and then being able to work backwards right down to the basic level with players, and understanding, okay, well, what is the injury profile of a developmental level cricketer? And if the injury profile for a developmental cricketer looks like this, then we have to ensure that we're putting in place specific development criteria that will mitigate against some of that injury profile when they get to that key age where you need to be accumulating training load. And for cricket, for example, it's pars fractures amongst developmental bowlers, or stress responses among developmental bowlers, which then limits their ability to do the very task which is going to then allow them to become a professional. Because if you lose, you know, half a season or a full season because of a back issue where you can't actually bowl, because bowling's the thing that's going to irritate it, you do end up losing a considerable amount of skill development time, which is at a critical age. So therefore, the long-term athlete development program has to be very well aligned, or certainly did have to be very well aligned to mitigating those injury responses, but also getting players generally fitter as well. So like you say, you can deliver at the highest level. So those are probably sort of those three key components which we sort of spent quite a lot of time in. You know, plenty of other stuff that sat around that, but yeah, it was an interesting time. Like I say, Ross, I'm sort of thinking back again. That's so long ago now that I'm like racking my brains, going, what else did we do?
No, you gave some good info there. Just a couple of follow-ups then. So when you went in, listening was a big thing, understanding the game. A lot of listeners on here will probably be at some point going to an opportunity where they probably either don't know the sport or they don't know the environment that well. What did you do from a delivery perspective within that first few months? Did you go in and deliver anything, or did you deliver some minimal dose stuff in warm-ups? What did you deliver just initially to start moving the dial, like you said, on some of that sprint work or deceleration work? Or was it a case of just understanding the landscape for a few months?
Uh, no, no, definitely, definitely had to deliver because you're full time on the shop floor, strength and conditioning, so you're delivering to senior squad and academy squad at the time, and then subsequently, you've got more strength and conditioning coaches in. So most clubs have probably got 2 or 3 now: developmental S&C coach, senior S&C coach, and then probably intern level coach, and maybe some places will have sports scientists as well. But yeah, back then it was delivering, doing all the first team delivery, which would have been all the warm ups, all the strength programs, all the prehab, or in collaboration with the physio, all of the prehab and prep work. So yeah, a huge amount. And I think initially, like I said, when you start, you probably just go back to your strengths. Okay, and my strengths, I probably had a rugby background, so I was like, okay, well, I'm pretty good in the gym. I can help guys lift better. I can help them, do some of their, um, you know, segmental, supportive, structural development work pretty well. So I can work on that and I can improve that. But in the interim, I need to be learning. I need to be understanding a little bit more about what it actually is. What are the sports look like? What are the nuances within the sport from a physical development perspective? And then be able to, I guess, understand them and then build on them and layer on them. So it's like every sport will have those specific nuances that they do, they carry out. It's a bit like football and cricket. It's like an institution. They're like every single county will play football in the mornings, and it's like some of the clubs will have like 11-a-side goals that they get out in the mornings, and then they're having a kick around and everything. And it was always criticised. It was like highly criticised. Oh, there's going to be injuries and loads of hamstring injuries. Everything's a problem, and it's like, okay, I understand that, but in terms of preparation for fielding, for example, you've got a really, really good reactive source of agility-based movement with high speed, change of direction. As long as you're warm for that and you constrain the game to some extent, so people are not sliding in and doing all sorts of crazy stuff, then actually it's probably a pretty good warm up. Maybe that was my excuse for not banning it.
Believe in
But
it.
yeah, exactly. But I always thought it was good, and it got a really, really good mental lift. It's like the difference between telling guys, sorry, we're not playing football today, versus telling them we're going to play football today, is like night and day in a sport like cricket, where psychologically you have to be in a good place a lot of the time. You have to be able to raise your psychological state because it's tough. They're long days and it's a long season. So um, yeah, so there was yeah, it's a nuance in cricket, but like I say, I think you can take that and you can evolve it and you can move it on, and then you can actually probably start getting some physical outcomes or outputs from it, which don't necessarily look exactly like you'd wanted them to initially, but they'll give you the same thing. So, like you talk about their acceleration and deceleration for cricket as well. If they're playing football, they're probably touching that stuff with a fairly decent lick in the mornings. So as long as you're prepared for it, you're probably getting some physical stimulus from it. Whereas conventionally, from a strength and conditioning perspective, you go, well, we've got to be in the gym doing power output and Olympic lifting and what have you. But of course, you do need to do that work as well. But in terms of gross physical stimulus, there's something there as well, but it doesn't necessarily look like how you always perceive it. So yeah, so I think supporting some of the players who had immediate interest in gym work and physical development, and just trying to to get hold of those players who were interested and were engaged. But I mean, I'm painting that as if I did it really, really well. I didn't. I did it terribly at the time, because I would have been trying to force people. I would have been trying to engage people who had no interest. I go around it a completely different way now, I'm sure. But yeah, probably something you learn there is, yeah, put your energy, or certainly putting my energy, which I learned over time, because a lot of cricketers won't necessarily be fully engaged in that kind of that kind of work and physical development work, specifically in the gym, for example. They will be now more so than they were previously. But I think where you put your energy is really important, particularly in a sport like cricket, where you're going, well, actually, a lot of these guys are going to be engaged. A lot of them are not going to be engaged. So put your energy into the people who do want to be engaged. And then at some point, you'll get a change in the critical mass of people who are engaged. And that normally brings everybody else along for the ride at some point, because people start going, well, this becomes a norm as opposed to an exception. So, yeah, I think those are a couple of the key points. But yeah, I don't know if I've answered your question there, Ross.
Yeah, no, that's nice, mate.
Say?
I guess you went in as a delivery role, so of course you had to deliver, but strategically, how you got buy-in instantly, sometimes it's like do no harm in the first few months, especially when environment's not used to that work. And then you can build on the foundations there. But I know you, I know you pretty well, so I'm sure you delivered that well.
Well, I definitely didn't. I definitely didn't. I think, like you say there, you sort of, it's one of the things that taught me going into cricket, going into a sport we don't know anything about it. I probably tried to force it a little bit early on and got a bit frustrated with different things. Well, actually, this doesn't look like it should. This doesn't look like it should. This doesn't look like it should. But I think that process of probably trying to learn pretty quickly, and had some really good pros there. You know, I was a 23-year-old kid or whatever it was, and you got guys who are 30 years old, and they are kind of putting their arm around you as well and supporting you. And saying, look, you know, this is maybe the way it works here. You've probably got some good ideas, but you can evolve them over time. So I think there's, you know, a lot of learning comes from that. And actually, that's why I say nowadays, moving forwards, the idea of like listening and paying attention, respecting experience is absolutely key for me. And probably for many other people as well. And I think that's respecting experience regardless of the age of people as well. Because like I say, I walked into football in this environment. I don't know much about football. There's a lot of, you know, 18-year-old interns who know more about the nuances of the game than I do. So they're going to teach me something for sure. You've got to be open to that. So, but I think that, I think I learned a lot from cricket for sure.
Brilliant. And then I just want to go into one technical thing. So you mentioned there around pars, like being one of the limiting factors from a developmental perspective for bowlers. We experienced that injury here, obviously on a smaller scale within football, but it's quite prevalent across general sport, I think, at certain ages. In cricket, in specifically, what was the things that try to mitigate against that, like the physical things that you try to do ahead of those issues? And also from a load management perspective, was there anything you put in place around bowling volumes, bowling intensities, like at certain ages?
I mean, I don't remember the exact structure of of uh, of the different strategies that were put in place, but certainly the ECB had a series of different strategies that they put in place at the time or recommended for counties to utilise in terms of the number of days off and the number of days bowling, maybe like 2 consecutive days of bowling. There always had to be a day off following that. And there were a certain number of overs that if you bowled a certain number of overs, then you would have to offload to some extent if that, you know, or spread them more accordingly. So there were various strategies. I think from my perspective, I kind of was back then, I guess I was thinking, all right, well, it made sense, you know, the sort of the Gabbett-based research around training stress balance and looking at, well, progressive overload. You know, training stress balance, of course, it's not going to predict injuries. It's such a multifactorial, you know, range of risk factors. It's not going to predict injuries. So you don't use it to predict injuries, but you do probably use it to indicate change in load. And if change in load's the thing that causes inflammation and responses, then controlling change in load is probably something that will get a relatively good outcome. You know, it stands to reason, doesn't it, that, you know, if you wind a huge workload into somebody, there's going to be a period of time where the system is depressed whilst they supercompensate, and you have to respect that to then allow change. And, you know, the size of that workload spike is probably going to indicate the duration of recovery time, depending on, again, lots and lots of factors, but particularly in young people who don't have that training age and that physical robustness, it's probably a little bit longer. So I think a lot of our stuff was based on being a bit more flexible, but around progressive overload. And just ensuring that we were able to monitor the magnitude of change in load, as opposed to just saying, well, these are hard and fast rules. Because, you know, it's like there's so much inter-individuality between what individuals can and can't do and how much they can tolerate, that you have to have a bandwidth of flexibility in the way that you the way that you train people, that allows those who can to do more and progress more, because they'll be exposed to more, skill-based workload, which we know is important for cricketers, versus those who we probably need to consider don't have that capability. And a lot of that will be underpinned as well by some of your physical characteristics as well. You have a kid who has well-developed physical characteristics. They're probably going to be able to tolerate that workload and be able to deal with those changes and potentially greater workload spikes than those individuals who aren't necessarily physically developed. So there's a lot of, different factors, but as long as you're accumulating information consistently and using that information to then inform decision making, I don't think you're going to go too far wrong, as long as you've got something that sits behind your decision making. But yeah, I think that was the route we went down, kind of probably quite similar to what you do here, actually, Ross, in terms of looking at those changes and having a sort of an approximate known high intensity volume and intensity, and then being able to work around that known threshold. But again, you've got something that you can say, well, this is approximately what we know to be fairly challenging, so let's just be flexible around that. But we've also got to respect it as well. So I think that was from a I guess an ongoing monitoring front. And then things, from an actual development perspective, I guess just really focusing. We're talking about tall guys here. Most of the guys, they're gangly, tall cricketers. So trying to, but also with good genetics as well. So most of these guys are pretty powerful for kids. You'll see them in football all the time, where you've arguably got kids who've genetically got a neuromuscular system that can stimulate some pretty good physical outputs at a very, very high threshold, but they don't necessarily have the proximal muscle and proximal stability to then be able to harness the control that their genetic predisposition allows them to produce. So I think a lot of the work again was spent on trunk development, hip development, lateral hip development, overhead control, particularly in single leg control. And I guess those would be the icing on the cake, but everything that fits underneath that in terms of general strength levels through range, and just building a robust chassis, I guess, for young guys. So yeah, not particularly clever. I think frontal plane control and sagittal plane control of lumbopelvic stability would have been some really, really important areas for development. So a lot of the exercise choices and assessments would have been geared around some of those components. And then also your functional transferable based tasks as well. So, trying to, create derivatives of plyometric activities that would be provocative to challenging frontal plane and sagittal plane control, particularly with your arms overhead, and those sorts of things would have been focused on, as well as running, and just becoming a more efficient runner as well. So classic track and field derivatives from a running perspective, lots and lots of that kind of work. The more efficient you are as a runner, as a bowler, the chances are the more efficient you're going to be in terms of preserving energy and therefore preserving good motor patterns when you're running in. So yeah, so those would have been some of the basics.
Nice. Yeah, really nice, Lou. Thank you. Just moving on a little bit. So you've gone into different sports. You've transitioned to work different sports. And you challenged yourself recently, even coming into football that you didn't do loads of before. What have you found really useful when transitioning into different sports? Obviously, going in, listening, understanding the landscape. But from a mindset perspective, a lot of people would actually probably be fairly reluctant to do it because it's a big change and it's not what they know. So any advice you've got for people wanting to jump into a different sport or thinking maybe they can't go into a different sport because they haven't got that skill set?
Yeah, that's yeah, totally, mate. And don't get me wrong, whenever I've gone into a different sport, there is I have huge anxiety, going into a different sport. Or even just a different environment. There is always anxiety that you get, and you're like, oh, what could go wrong? What's the expectation on me as well? Because you're like, all right, if you're experienced, particularly going to a different environment, it's like I said to you earlier, you come here and you're sort of bumbling around to start with, because you're like, I don't know what's going on. The systems are different. Things are, the people are different. There's so many things to try and establish, to get your foot in the door, and then to actually start giving the best of you. But it does take a little bit of time to start with. But I think I think probably one thing that I've learned moving forwards is like to get better and to improve, you've got to throw it out there. Like you have to throw it out there, because I always think that, and everyone in sports who's worked in sport will have encountered like some very powerful emotional responses from different situations. It might be a confrontation in an environment, or it might be you got sacked, or it might be something or a challenge of a player or anything like that. And there'll be certain circumstances that you really clearly remember during the course of time. And I've got loads of these, and those, I think, are the moments during your career where you get the biggest learning. It's almost like in strength and conditioning terms, it's almost like the strength of the stimulus determines the level of super compensation that you get. And that's what I think you get when you get these tough scenarios. So if you just become anxious about doing something, whether you're in an environment or you're considering going into an environment, and you don't just throw it out there, just throw yourself into it, and just be accepting that you're probably going to get these scenarios where you get a pretty big emotional response, and you get a lot of anxiety and you're really challenged. But those are definitely the situations which give you the greater level of learning. So you improve much more on the basis of those big hits. Because if you avoid those big hits, I don't necessarily think you get better, or you don't get better as fast. So I think it's like don't always just like engage in the anxiety that you get, and just throw it out there, because that's where you'll get the biggest and the fastest learning responses. So yeah, I definitely, an example from my perspective would be like being creative. So like, I'm not creative in any way, shape, or form. I would say I'm totally uncreative. But I've worked with lots of practitioners over time who've been like really, really creative. For me, I'm like, it just needs to be like this, boring, do this, lift these weights, run this fast, do this thing, monitor it like this, show professional attitude, go home, rest as much as you can. But if everyone looked at the world like that, professional sport would be super boring. But I appreciate, having seen some really good creative practitioners operate, that you do need to demonstrate a level of creativity, or certainly have the capability to do that when required from time to time. And I guess it's being able to pick when you do need to be more creative than other times, which is an important skill. But for me, being creative is just like not something that comes naturally to me. So for me, I've had to go like, I have to throw it out there to be creative. And that's like really, really hard, because it's like, right, well, I'm just going to make something up today and do it. And if it doesn't work, then I'll just cop it. Or I'll just, it might work and it'll be really good, and then I'll get a really good learning response from that. Or it might not work, and then similarly, I'll get a good learning response from that. But I think that those, that to me is, I'm trying to engage more and more with that kind of mentality the older and older I get, and the more I learn. And again, like a good example again would be, so like I worked with a guy called Alan Walters at Leicester Tigers, who's a exceptional practitioner, very, very good motivator of people, unbelievable motivator of people. And he's running a warm-up one day at the club, and he's set out this intricate session with cones everywhere, and poles and all sorts of stuff going on. And he's come out, and he started getting the lads through it, and the lads don't really know what they're doing, and they're a bit confused. And he's just like, right, forget it. This didn't work, did it? Have a lap, lads. Off you go. And he just canned it on the spot, and off you go, have a lap. And it was like, well, it didn't work, but never mind. I just, had a crack at it, and I know for next time. So I think there's, I've learned a lot from other people as well, in terms of actually just sometimes you've got to throw it out there. So, don't be anxious. You will be anxious. It will be difficult. You will make mistakes, but just engage in it, because you get the learning from it. The worst thing you can do is hide away from that stuff, or pull back from that level of anxiety, for sure.
Great advice, mate. Really good. I've got one more for you globally, and then we're going to go into a couple of little fire question ones at the end, if you don't mind. So, the one I've got for you generally is, could you talk to me a little bit about like this concept around MDT collaboration? So, collaborating with people that you might have to influence, i.e., head coaches. You spoke a bit about players going into cricket as well, and what you think has worked quite well within that space, and then also what has not worked so well.
Um, yeah, I guess from an MDT perspective, the best functioning MDTs that I've worked with have a great deal of clarity on what they're trying to accomplish on a day-to-day basis, and normally that comes from having clarity from the leadership. So like rugby's probably a pretty good example, because most rugby clubs will have a game model where they say, and it'll be the same in football clubs, but most rugby clubs will have a defined way that they want to play and the things that they want to do really, really well. And I think if you have that level of clarity, it then allows you to one, understand a little bit more about the training model that then underpins that game model. And if you understand the training model, that allows you to then create the changes in the players and the athletes that you then need to. So I think that idea of, first and foremost, if an MDT has a very, very clear point at the top from the leadership, that they know that they're going to work towards these specific things, or they're working towards this greater goal, as it were. I guess it's like a shared goal, isn't it? Like teams work better if there's a shared goal. If the shared goal comes from leadership and it's a definition of what they want the team to look and play like, then that makes it very, very easy, because you then, like I say, you can work with the coaches around, well, we're all clear on exactly what it is we want to do. What does the training model look like off the back of that? Well, we want to do 3 or 4 unit sessions a week because our scrum needs to be excellent. Okay, great. So what are the implications for that in terms of us building players up to that level of exposure in the first instance? What do the academy players need to be able to do to be able to then jump into a first team session if you're doing 3 scrummaging sessions a week or 4 scrummaging sessions a week of relatively high intensity? Well, their program probably needs to look like X, Y, and Z. And right from a development age, they need to be building that tolerance around axial load and spinal stability and trunk force production and all of the sort of jazzy stuff. But it all goes back to the ultimate shared goal of what the team need to play like. So I think that's, we talked about this before with cricket a little bit, but I think that's probably the most important thing in terms of having that initial framework to then work on. If you have that initial framework, it makes things very, very easy. And then I think sitting underneath that, you can debate things around the technical underpinnings till the cows come home around, what it is you're trying to develop. What are the methods that you're going to use? Are you going to sprint them 3 times a week? Are you going to do strength sessions and power sessions? Are you going to use, different modes of strength training at different times of the season? That all those sorts of things. I think, again, if you know that you're just trying to create hypertrophy in a bunch of guys on a regular, consistent basis, then you're going to have a selection of 4 or 5 methods that are going to deliver that outcome. And then it's really a case for the experts in the room to determine, which one you're going to do and which one you're going to attack more consistently. But again, because the experts who you say, okay, these are the strength and conditioning coaches or the guys in the gym, they're very aligned to that overall goal and the training model, it allows them to do their job much more effectively, but also to monitor progression much more easily. Again, a rugby club that I've been at, it literally was, what are we trying to develop? I just want the forwards 2 kilos of lean muscle mass heavier, and that's what we want them to be. And we want the average size of our pack to be heavier than all the other teams that we play against, and it's composed by lean mass. So it just means that, well, okay, that means that we need to run 3 extra hypertrophy upper body bias strength training sessions during the course of the week. When do they fit in during the course of the schedule? We'll do that on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. The coach, we need to confirm whether that's okay and that fits with the structure of the training sessions, so that we get the best outcome from a hormonal and a training perspective in terms of effort. Yes, that aligns, or no, it doesn't align. We make adaptations accordingly. Nutrition know that that's our key objective, so the nutritionists are on hand with protein shakes extra carbohydrates for those guys who are underweight, so they can therefore backfill that work and they can create that performance outcome. So I think that again, just an example of how I think that sort of that gain model can cascade down right down to the bottom level. So yeah, I think from a framework perspective, that's how I'd see things, or how I've seen things work most successfully. And then I think consistent and transparent communications is really, really important as well. And again, something you guys do really, really well here, I think, is just that ongoing consistency of regular communication around key themes and key responsibilities that people need to be carrying out on a regular basis. The worst thing that can happen, and again, I would have made this mistake previously, is not being consistent enough with communications. And as soon as you start missing a meeting, or you don't get that check-in with someone, or you don't do this, then you create more ambiguity in the environment. If you create more ambiguity, people start talking, people start asking questions, that the level of transparency is reduced, and therefore it becomes harder to manage people as well. So I think that consistency of communication is absolutely critical. And then the final thing to add to that is probably around lines of responsibility. So again, I think what I can see here that's really effective is how clear most people are on their responsibilities, and it's very, very defined in terms of what you should be doing is X, Y, and Z, and that needs to be at this standard, and this is the information that we need, and it needs to be really, really consistent. And then that's then followed up with a level of accountability, which is critical. If you don't have accountability in the environment, things probably won't necessarily work that well. So, not following up that conversation where this wasn't done at a high enough level, or this just wasn't done at all, it needs to be done moving forwards. Those little conversations on an ongoing basis are absolutely critical, I think, just for raising the bar from the bottom up. So yeah, I think those components, I reckon, from my perspective and what I've seen over the years, those would be key.
Luke, thanks so much for your detailed answer there, mate, around MDT. That was class. You can definitely tell your experience and what you've gone through as a practitioner shining through there. If you don't mind, I'm just going to skip to the last couple of questions, which are designed to be kind of quick fire. So off the top of your head, give us a couple of answers. Nothing too crazy. Don't worry. Don't panic. And just so the listeners know, I've gone in here completely unscripted with Luke, which is fine for me as a host, but I haven't given Luke any opportunity to prep. So I think you've dealt with that very well.
Thanks for disclosing that.
No, I wanted to, because you spoke about chucking yourself in from a creativity perspective. Well, we've kind of done it today, so that's brilliant. And I've only done it twice before, so it's pretty novel in the last 5 years. So first one for me, mate, is can you tell me how many people spring to mind, but who has been your inspirational people that have inspired you and really developed you to drive on stuff you've learned things from, whether it be technical detail, whether it be just generally how to navigate situations?
I think early on in my career, again, probably harking back to cricket days, I went into cricket, spent a bit of time in cricket, professional environment, and probably thought I was pretty class, which I wasn't. And then I remember meeting a few people I met. I met Alex Wolf and I think Raf Brandon at the time, when the EIS was very technically weighted. And I remember hearing those guys present and thinking, I am so bad. When you're like, these people are so much better than me. And they're more experienced and everything. So I think that drove me to actually join the EIS, because I was like, well, if this is how good people need to be working at this sort of level, I need to be working with those people to learn from these people. So I think that was a really important time for me to understand that actually it was like a real leveler. It was like, I just need to get much, much better here from a technical perspective. So that's where it's at. I've got to go there. So I think that was really important for me. I think in terms of pushing like standards and expectations from my own perspective, I think I mentioned it to you the other day, like rugby environment, rugby coach. I remember saying, if you accept it, you promote it.
Yeah.
To staff members particularly, and it was just a brilliant way of like holding everybody in the environment accountable for sloppy behavior and sloppy practice, and just all the time we've got to be thinking about, like, let's raise the standards of everything we do. And I think that's sort of underpinned a little bit around my own philosophy. And I don't sort of go into philosophy too much, but I think performance first decision making is something that I've always sort of tried to hold myself accountable to. Is that, are my decisions on a day-to-day basis, right down to the small decisions and interactions you have with people, are they performance first decision making? And I think I try and make athletes think in the same way. Is that, you know, the decision you can make a soft decision, or you can make a performance decision. You know, and often it doesn't mean doing the hard thing all the time. It can be do the easy thing sometimes. So I think those, yeah, those are key things and moments, I think, and people who've pushed me and inspired me a little bit.
Nice, mate. Very nice. Two more. What would you tell, and I think maybe some of this will come out with the stories you told today, but what would you tell a younger self coming out of university, going into their first entry role with everything you've learned so far? What would be the big bit of advice you'd tell your younger self?
I think probably don't bring your ego with you too much to start with. You know, is that you only know what you know. And when you're a young practitioner, you don't know much, you know, full stop. You might think you do, but you have to accept that there's a lot of people who know all the other stuff, you know, that you don't know, and your bandwidth of experience is so low. But, you know, if you're not open to engaging and listening and taking stuff on board, then your speed of development will be slow. So I'd probably be like, actually, if I'd maybe been a little bit more open to things, not that I was a big ego or anything like that, but, you know, you always sort of, you're bristling a little bit when you're a youngster, and, you know, you think you know everything, and then from a technical perspective, I know this little thing is really important, it's not. So I think just, you know, being a bit more open and, you know, taking stuff on board as early as possible, being a sponge, you know, I think that's really important when you're young, but at the same time, be critical, you know, like, be critical of things
Yeah,
in your own head. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
I think sometimes we've lost the ability to critically think. You know, it's underpins science. It underpins the degrees that we all do, that everybody does, is critical thinking. That's part of it. But I think, you know, sometimes we forget actually to be critical, but being critical is not a bad thing, because it gets you to the best decision, or should get you to the best decision.
yeah. Really nice. I think from my experience, like, being critical was something that I was really good at, very analytical, but how I projected that early on was probably
Yeah,
not the best thing. Like, it rubbed maybe a couple of people up the wrong way. It's about how you do that and how you come up with
yeah,
those solutions.
just a
And then, like you say,
couple.
just a couple. Yeah, 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 yeah. You've seen that already, so I'm
Yeah,
downplaying
I,
that.
I would have done the same. I would have done the same, 100%.
Top man. And then last one, mate. Like, you've got loads of experience. You've got a, I guess, a real CV of work for sure. But what does the future lie? Where does the future lie for you? And what do you want to achieve in the years you've got left?
So I don't know exactly. I love coaching and I love helping athletes directly. And I think moving forwards for me, it's going to be about um, facilitating, and just facilitating everybody around me as best I can. You know, like, I'm probably at the stage in my career where I'm older, I'm uglier, I'm open to new things more than I've ever been before, because I think as you get older and you accumulate experience, you realize there's so many different ways to skin a cat, that you can be more open to things and you can find different options. And it's that idea, you know, like this sort of Buddhist mentality, not that I'm particularly Zen or anything like that, but like beginner's mind, and actually having a beginner's mindset about everything. You know, everything's new. You know, you can actually, even though you might know something in a very, very high level of detail, you know, you might have a PhD on something like that, but actually there's always new stuff that you can learn about that same particular area, because things evolve all the time. So I think just, like I say, using my experience to facilitate other people and try and help other people to develop and to get the best out of athletes and performance, and other staff and each other as well. So I think that's where that's where I'd like to see myself moving forwards. But yeah, you
Brilliant.
never know. I said to my wife the other day, look, it's the first time in our lives where 1 year from now, I don't have a clue what we'll be doing or where we'll be. Like, I actually don't know. But again, for the first time in my career, that doesn't fill me with dread.
Yeah.
It's okay. So yeah, that's so I think about right.
Great. And mate, you definitely give off Zen vibes. So I think you could shift towards that Buddhist mentality, definitely.
I am known for a bit of mindfulness from time to time, mate, when things get
Nice.
tough.
Yeah, yeah, well, you need something, right? So mate, listen, thank you very much. It's been a genuine pleasure. Obviously, I've got to know you over the last month or so in a lot more detail. So top guy and wealth of experience and knowledge. And just thank you for coming on and sharing some of that today. If the listeners want to follow you, I guess, or get to know you a little bit more from a social media perspective, what's the best avenue to go down?
Well, I'm old school, so I'm just on LinkedIn now. I've come away a little bit from Twitter, but LinkedIn's the best place to go for me now. Yeah, not on Instagram.
LinkedIn, Luke
Yeah.
Woodhouse. Have a look. You'll see all the experience on there. And if there's anything directly you want to reach out to, I'm sure when he's got time, he'll be able to get back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Ross. Great to chat.
Legend. Thank you. And all for those listeners, thanks for tuning in. Head over to the website, www.dailysportscience.com. Have a little look at offers on there. If you're not signed up for membership, obviously podcast is free for all, but there's lots of other services that we can offer within the performance space, but also technical, tactical, and different bits and pieces on there. But for now, thank you very much, and we'll speak soon.